So this is our inaugural episode of our autumn series, Grains of Wisdom, where we'll actually be doing a combination of webinars and podcasts. So we hope you'll join us for both of those, and we will be advertising that on all of our social media platforms in due course as they come through. But this evening, we thought we'd kick things off with a tasting of our wonderful trilogy pack, for Cullen Trilogy Pack. And to help us with that, we have a fantastic panel lined up to engage in our insightful conversations with our own master distiller, Noel Sweeney. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Shameen de Bruin. Shameen will be well known to a lot of you through her whiskey industry journalist. We've often pieces, Shameen, in Whiskey Magazine and so on and so forth. And of course, you are the whiskey and wine buyer with Mitchell. So thank you very much for being with us this evening. I'd also like to welcome Mark McLaughlin of Cast Strength Communications. And Mark brings with him his unique insight into both on-trade and off-trade. And again, being a whiskey industry expert, we're looking forward to your contribution, Mark. And finally, not last least, but we have John Egan, who goes under the handle of Whiskey Cat, who we are all very familiar with on Twitter. And John is a connoisseur of whiskey and a collector, and we're delighted to have you here with your unique perspective as well this evening, John. So,
thank you very much, Caroline.
I will ask you, Noel, what are we kicking off with in terms of the tasting?
Well, I mean, I'm already ahead of the posse here. I've got mine in the glass, and I've started with the blend. So if you want to start off with our premium blend, I think that's a fitting start to start with. Sometimes I start off talking about grain and then I talk about malt, but tonight I says we'll go heads in with the first one, which is our blend. And the premium blend is a mixture of double distilled malt and grain whiskey. The grain is actually from about 2012, and it was bottled. This was actually bottled in late around 2018. So you're talking about a minimum age here of 6 years of age. The malt was slightly older than that, but it has quite a full body and a great finish and a beautiful taste. So I'm going to ask the guys here if any of them wants to add any comment in relation to the tasting, because everybody knows what I say about it. What I'm interested in seeing is what you guys think and what brings it to the table as a blend in the market that we're in today, even, you know.
Well, I quite enjoy the premium blend. I found it was one that I went to during the summer, and this might sound like sacrilege now to other whiskey people, but I found like it was the most interesting one to pair with iced coffee. Yeah, I think especially I like sort of more artisanal coffee, so I got like a cold brew washed Ethiopian coffee, and I thought that it paired really, really well with it, and that the fruitiness of the coffee was really highlighted by the sort of smooth, nutty sort of oakiness of it, and it made a really well-rounded summer cocktail.
For me, I think that the balance is really fabulous in it. I mean, I love the honey, the orange peel type characteristics that it has. I think it's really refreshing. It's a really refreshing drink, you know.
Yeah, we get a lot of that orange peel effect from the grains in particular, and I think you'll find that, and especially more mature grain, it's more pronounced, and I think that's what's happening here as well. That orange flavor comes through a little bit, but also the vanilla. Again, these were all matured in bourbon. Mark, what do you think?
I think it's again the mature grain element of it is the thing that really makes it stand out for me. I feel like like it's called a premium blend, but it most certainly does taste premium. You get those kind of soft, sweet grain elements, maybe the orange, but the kind of malt spice that comes through, the tiny little bit of biscuitiness, really makes it a really nice and rounded whiskey. I think it's a great first product to come out with, and it's really, the blends can be here or there for anybody that drinks a lot of whiskey, but it's definitely a good start. I've always enjoyed it since the first time I tried it. But good whiskey.
Thanks very much. And I think that just to let everybody out there that's watching tonight know that the premium blend has been upgraded as of the end of this year. We're bringing out a new version of this with an age statement on it. So we're going to have an 8-year-old replacing this. So if you can get your hands on the premium blend, it's going to be going off the market towards the end of the year. I would highly recommend it. It's a lovely whiskey, and I think it kind of demonstrates the style that we're kind of interested in Powerscourt. So, any other comments or questions in relation to the blend?
I think it's quite versatile because it's got a lot of body, and it packs a lot of flavor. Like I've tried it in a few kind of highball cocktails, soda, honey, things like that, and it really it balances quite well in those types of drinks. And it's something that I think sometimes some companies kind of miss that factor where they're going for maybe this overly toffee style or this kind of more caramel-esque style, and they forget to leave that kind of the kind of fruity or sweeter backbone that'll hold up when you do it in mixed drinks. But I think I really do. I really like this product. It's a really nice whiskey and it works well.
It's not as spicy as some people like some of their blends either, but again, that's part of the nature of the wood and whiskey that we've got in here.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, and I mean the finish on it as well. I mean, I know six-year-old grain, that's quite a proportion of it, but I think the finish is really exceptional. Like, you know, given its age, really, you know, it really does hold its own, which is impressive, you know.
Yeah. So, would we like to move on to the next one on the lineup? I'm going to look at the 10-year-old, and I've been bold. I've had them all out here for a little while, just breathing, as it were, and warming up a little bit. And our 10-year-old is a single grain for Colin, and it's matured exclusively in bourbon for a minimum of 8 to 9 years. And then we give it a double whammy. We put it back into bourbon, another fresh bourbon, and that boosts the kind of vanilla, that kind of buttery flavor that you get in here. And that more mellows it a little bit more, but it also helps with the oak and vanilla content of this grain. So it's interesting from the point of view, it's just a single grain. A lot of people don't bring single grains out because they tend to use it as a kind of a thinner for blends. But because this has been matured exclusively in bourbon initially, and then given another little time to pick up some more flavor from the wood, it's got a lot of character, I think, and a lot to offer.
This one is probably the biggest seller in Mitchell and Son of the range. I think it sells like 2 to 1, maybe the other ones. And I think it's because it's a very approachable whiskey. It's an excellent whiskey, I think, for recommending to people who are kind of starting their journey with whiskey and have come in with being like, oh, you know, I know the classics, but I want to try something different. And I've always found we have now a bottle open for tasting of it underneath, and it's always one that when the consumer tries a bit, they were much more inclined to buy the bottle than maybe some of the other ones that we have available. Pardon me. But yeah, I think it's a very well-rounded, very well-balanced whiskey. A little bit of fruitiness in it, a little bit of acidity comes through. So it's quite refreshing as well.
But while Shamim is composing herself there, let me be absolutely clear that I've made a note about that bottle under the counter at Mitchell's. This for me is, I love this whiskey. I genuinely love this whiskey. And I know somebody's going to say something about cocktails now and it's going to upset me, but I really, really enjoyed this whiskey. Single grains in particular, because there is, you'll know where I'm coming from when I say this. It's difficult to hide in single grain. You know, there's very little you can hide or cover up in it. It's either good whiskey or it's not. And for me, this has always been an excellent whiskey as far as I'm concerned. Again, beautiful balance in the whiskey for a single grain. Yet again, a really lovely finish and very, very refreshing. Plenty of notes, almonds, citrus, and honey. I just really enjoy it. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Mark, what do you think? You're going to have you a favorite cocktail for this one as well, or dare I
I
use more?
probably do have cocktails for this one, but I think
Well, you
this
know
is
what we do in Power Score? We have it in ice cream. So,
that's the
so
stuff.
I'm
It's
not.
very tasty.
I'm not afraid to cocktails at all. I think, and again, a lot of people ask you how should you taste your whiskies, and I said I don't mind. You can, as long as you drink plenty of it, and we sell it to you. We're more than happy to provide it. And people should find a way that they like drinking their whiskey. I tend not to put water into whiskey the older it gets, but younger whiskies, yeah, it benefits and it helps to open up the flavor sometimes. But once it gets over about 10-year-old or more, you're looking at tasting it as it arrives in the bottle, because that's generally can be at cask strength of 40% or higher. But minimum strength is 40 by law. So if it does need a little drop of water, fire ahead. But Mark, what would you recommend with this one then?
I don't know about cocktails, but I'll tell you one thing. Like I think this is a great whiskey, and it kind of continues on the story that maybe Grenore started back in the day when it first came out, and the older the Kilbeggans as well. Nobody ever really talks about, say, Irish Distillers grain whiskey, because they haven't really released too many over the years. But one thing that I found from, I suppose, tasting hundreds of whiskies in Ireland and working with some smaller distilleries as well, is that the grain whiskey that you were producing, Black and Cooley, it was so good and so consistent. And when you relied on really good bourbon casks, like you've done with this, and even refreshing with fresh bourbon casks, you get all these lovely, really distinct nutty textures. You get a little bit of that fruitiness, but it holds flavor so consistently on the palate. And I really do think that these grain whiskies are going to be a massive part of the future, and as the industry goes forward. But there's absolutely no doubt about this one, that it's well balanced. It's really, really complex. It's got the right amount of spice notes. It would almost fool you into thinking that it's not a grain whiskey, because there's so much flavor going on. It's a tremendous dram for the price of it. It's just good grain whiskey is hard to come by, and this is one of the better ones. So
I agree. I think it's quite a pliable whiskey as well. Like, it's great on its own. It's great with sort of in a summer cocktail. I think something that's more orange dominated. I also paired it with cheeses one night, and I thought that worked out really, really well with sort of the more peppery cheeses, like a pecorino or even a parmesan. It stands up quite well to them because it's got that depth of flavor with it, and the vanilla just really highlights the flavors in the food quite well.
Just on that note, Shameen, we actually are finding the food pairings that we're doing here with Santina is actually heading it up, our in-house foods historian, and she is always trying to go local with the produce, but we've taken cheese from as far away as Kilkenny, John, and certainly all of our whiskies really do pair very nicely with the whiskies, and we have a specific tour now around it actually, which we'll be promoting in the months coming up to Christmas. So thank you for that. And I know certainly from my perspective, it's my favorite, and it does appeal to a lot of ladies out there. As you said, in terms of Shameen, just starting your journey out is a very approachable whiskey. So thanks for mentioning the pairings.
Yeah. I love a good whiskey pairing personally. Like, one of my favorite things to do, like when I'm studying, is to kind of work it out with a food pairing. I think it makes me feel like a little bit less like I'm drinking alone, but like
it goes very well as well with chocolate and that kind of dessert mode. So you should always there's Santina on the screen there now with her food pairing and cushion. And really she is an expert in this tasting of matching food and whiskies together, and she really does a massive amount of work on it, and it's really, really good. She has that honey as well from Wicklow with the heather honey, and that really adds to the whole scene of the tasting when you do the whiskey tasting there in the distillery. But yeah, I mean, it complements an awful lot of things. It's sweet and light in some ways, but it's got that texture of cream and kind of I said buttery or buttered popcorn, that kind of thing, because the material is made from is corn, and it's distilled up to about 94.7% alcohol, And that kind of does is what John mentioned there. It tends to take out a lot of the congeners and the complexities that you get in other whiskies, insofar as the chemical makeup of the spirit is concerned. But having said that, it still maintains a certain amount of that oiliness that you wouldn't expect from a single grain whiskey, and that is where it comes into its own when it matures and mellows a little bit and starts to blend together. And really, a 10-year-old, fabulous. I'm going to be waiting for this to come out as a 15-year-old, like we had with the Green Ore in times gone by, and hopefully we'll get as far as an 18 or 20-year-old with this particular amount of whiskey that we have in Powerscourt at the moment. So that's something to look forward to the future for single grains, I think.
Well, that food platter there, highlighted by Santina, looks absolutely delicious. Absolutely delicious. And also to echo, I see a comment there from Noel Martin, and he recommends pairing the glass of whiskey with another glass of whiskey. So I'm going to give a shout out to Noel on that, and absolutely, yeah,
That's
couldn't agree more.
A balanced diet, huh?
Yes, absolutely. I really couldn't agree more. Noel, I suppose we're talking about single grain and grain, and nice little segue, I suppose, to the barley. I mean, I know Powerscourt is fortunate enough to have its own barley, or the recourse to its own barley, and certainly it's been in the news. It's been a pretty dismal summer, and dismal summers do not bode well for barley harvests. How have you found it?
Well, actually, I was talking to the malt suppliers today just on this question of what is the outlook for the coming year. And the first thing he says to me, some of the barley is skinning. And I said, what does that mean? Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners mightn't understand this. But he's saying that the husk is coming off the grain in processing when it's getting to the malting plant. Now he says he's seen some of that, and that's not a major issue at all with malting. The volume or the yield, he's saying, is dropping slightly insofar as we will get slightly less alcohol from the barley that they're processing into malt. But that's marginal as well. We're talking about less than maybe 4 or 5 litres of alcohol per tonne of a drop. In relation to the overall harvest as such, there seems to be a fairly ample amount of malt available, and we're looking at possible price drop for the coming year, even from this year. 2 years ago, the prices were very high because of the dry summer that we had. But this year, surprisingly, we did have a very dry start of the year, but as we've witnessed quite a lot of rain in the last few months, a couple of months anyway, it seems not to have had an adverse effect. But the harvest won't be, or the trials with the malt and the barley that they have at the moment, or taking in at the moment, won't be completed until sometime beginning of November, and that's when we get a real true picture of it. But I'm not concerned at this stage. I think from what I've talked to our friends in the malting business, they certainly aren't anyway. As far as the barley for the pot still, the variety that we're using in Powerscourt is a thing called Gangway, and it seems to be have done fairly well. The barley is in the shed as we speak, and we will be using some of that hopefully before the end of the year, but it might even be into the new year before we get to schedule it into our production. But and again, they seem quite happy with the price and everything else. So happy days. I don't think it's going to be a major problem into the new year anyway.
Well, that's a bit of good news.
Yeah, and the main variety that they're using down the south now is called Planet, and this is the 3rd year that they've been using that. But every year, Chargus and the malting companies and the growers go through extensive research and development and trials and sometimes their new varieties come in quite quickly. But this year now, it's been a couple of years now since we've had any major change in the varieties that they're sowing. So we'll see what happens next year. But this year we seem to be happy enough.
Yeah, good to hear. Good to hear.
Shall we move on to a malt then? And we'll try our 14-year-old, moving swiftly along, as they say. And I think going from a grain as we have to a malt, you suddenly get this kind of complexity and more flavor and a little bit more of a malty tone coming into the whole whiskey. Obviously, the grains have changed and the whole body of the spirit is different as you taste it and take the flavor in. Again, you're still going to have those base kind of vanilla coming from the wood and the honey and all of that. But I think that this is just a weightier whiskey is maybe the best way of describing it. And I'm not the most eloquent with the language when it comes to telling people about all the different fruit flavors and all the rest of it. But I do love to hear other people's opinions on these and what do they think comes from the spirit, because I can then use it in my literature and all the rest of it that they think that we add. So I'm delighted and to hear what you have to say about our previous samples, but perhaps, Janine, what would you think about this as an example of a malt?
I think it's a quintessential example of a malt. If I'm honest, it hits kind of all of those textbook malty notes that you read about, but it's got sort of a muscular through line to it. So like it goes from strength to strength. I think for me, and it's the finish that is my favorite. There's these really nice sort of rich, like buttery biscuit notes, like digestives or hobnobs or something, like really like specific in that. And then there's that slight sort of like spice. I think it's like a sort of a cinnamony nutmeg touch to it, but it doesn't overwhelm it, which I think that the balance is played very well. I'd be a fan of this kind of whiskey, actually, because I think it's one of the ones where you can have one whiskey and feel quite satiated because the flavor profile is so complex.
Thank you very much, Mark. I see.
Yeah, it's class. I think this is one of the whiskies where I think we as the Irish whiskey industry need to shout about the fact that there's so much double distilled malt out there. Because it just, and immediately on the nose, it's got this really, and it's got intensity. It's got this lovely vibrant kind of peach note to it. There's kind of a boiled sweet element, but it gets slightly richer, which is surprising, I think, because it's predominantly bourbon matured, but you get this kind of little touch of maybe ripe plum. But it's on the palate where this is big and it's layered and it's got a lot of spice, and it's got those kind of typical apple and pear notes that you would expect from the distillery that it comes from. But also, again, that finish, that kind of butteriness, that big and roundedness to it. It's just, it packs a lot of punch for 14 years. And it's a really good example of what you can do with really good malt spirit and really good bourbon casks. You don't need to play around with all these fancy casks all the time, or do loads and loads of finishes. And it's great, and you've done some of the best finishes there is on the Irish market, but it's not always necessary. And I just think it's a really good example, as Shamim said, quintessential single malt whiskey. Like this is what all the young distilleries should aspire to. This is clean, distillate driven. It's full flavored. It's just quality.
I'm starting to blush here, Mark.
I
know where you're coming from. I kind of when we looked at producing and bringing out this range of whiskies, we kind of looked at it and said, all right, a lot of the whiskies that you mentioned out there in the malt category are all a lot of them are coming from a different. There are only a couple of sources for aged whiskey. Of this age anyway, and so everybody, all of the competitors, I suppose, or fellow distillers or producers that have started up kind of fresh, don't have that their own product yet. As we in Powerscourt are the same. Our whiskey won't be mature until next year, 3-year-old. So when you're looking at this, you're kind of looking at it, well, yeah, a lot of the other distillers, and to their credit, have gone and said, well, I need to put my twist on this product and have something to add to it or whatever. So you do get a lot of different finishes, and you'll have wine finishes and beer finishes, and
I'm mad for a good wine finish now, because one of my favorite things to do is to get like a wine similar to the wine that it came from and the whiskey, and to see if I can spot, like, I love that comparison.
I've no problem with that at all. But my point was that I wanted to put out the whiskey as I made it and as it matured in bourbon, and to say, well, look, here's the baseline. Anything after here now, people can go up or down or whatever, and judge them on their merits as a single malt that just had one kind of maturation feature, because everybody else has done something different. Not very few people have just brought this out as a single, as matured in bourbon. And yes, Mark.
I think for anybody watching, or anybody that gets to have a discussion like this about good single malt whiskey, especially in Ireland, like, we all know how good the previous whiskey that you made, like Tyrconnell 10, the Madeira finish, one of the best whiskeys there. I really do think out there. Just really good value, really well rounded, and a really good example of what wine finishing can do for a whiskey. But again, I love the fact that it's straight bourbon matured. It's got all the body that you expect from a double distilled whiskey. As a geek, and as a nerd, and anybody who's even training their palate along the way, this is the type of whiskey you need to get familiar with, get deep down and think about it, and spend a bit of time with distillates of this quality. And like we've seen some great whiskies come from similar sources, like Dumbles are doing great things with 12-year-olds and stuff. Those extra couple of years really do make a massive difference to this distillate. It's a really good example of really top quality Irish whiskey. It's good.
Couldn't agree more. Obviously, you're a very good judge of whiskey. Now, John, you're going to bust me bubble, are you?
No, I'm certainly not. And I agree with both speakers there. I mean, I love the wine finishes. I love the depth and the ulterior characters that they bring to a whiskey. I think it can be fabulous, but that in no way, shape, or form is to downplay bourbon maturation. And you mentioned, Noel, about maybe not being particularly verbose. Well, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's immaterial though, because every time, and I while the guys were speaking, I just took the time to kind of go back and try and explore it a little bit more while I had it in my glass. And every time you go back, you get a little bit extra. You get something different. Complex is let's be honest, can be a cop out, and it can also be a very realistic and down to earth expression of something that literally gives you an awful lot more than you think it should. Bourbon, sure. Vanilla, malt, you're going to get that characteristic. You're going to get something else in terms of maybe spiciness or something like that, depending on the interaction with the wood. I think though that when you examine this, it gives a lovely long finish. Backwards from that, you've got that same nuttiness. You've got a very boiled sweet. I don't know who mentioned that, and I agree. There's a real boiled sweet aspect to this. It's beautiful. Cinnamon I'm getting from it. Like, it's not right that these flavors or these aromas are coming from a whiskey in one sense, but they're there. So it's really a good whiskey, and not to be downplayed in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it's a really strong representation, I think, of one of the major strengths of Irish single malt whiskey, that it can produce this level of aroma and feedback from it. I really enjoy it. So sorry, no bubble bursting today. Well, not at the moment anyway. Actually, while we're talking about that though, I mean, the wood, I know what we're looking at here, and we're dealing with the third say of a bourbon matured, bourbon developed whiskies, but in terms of other woods, in terms of other profiles, what do you see working well for Cullen and for Powerscourt?
I mean, obviously, when you're starting a new distillery and you're bringing out fresh whiskey or fresh new make, you're going to experiment And I, I mean, a lot of what I preach to people about making whiskey is bourbon gives you a baseline for everything. And once you can get that, because it's one of the fresher woods, if you go for a brand new oak cask, it delivers an awful lot of tannins. And we tried that in Cooley as well with both grain and some malt for a short time. And it just gets so woody and so intense that we are blessed that we have something like bourbon cask. And as everybody, in the industry knows, you can only make bourbon with a brand new cask. So when you do try some of the bourbon whiskies, you can find this amount of timber in the whiskey itself. It has great wood flavor, but very tanning. And because again, the climate, etc., in America gives you different maturation characteristics, it works for bourbon. It's not overpowered by the new wood. But once that bourbon is empty, the cask, after maybe 3 to 7 or 8 years of age, and all the bourbons go to sometimes even 2 years, you have a cask that has still got a lot to offer and a lot to give to the whiskey. And you make picks that up without that hard tannings, and over time it just develops the character with the spirit interacting with those chemicals being extracted from the wood. So you get a great roundness to the spirit in the whiskey and the maturation. The wood itself, people say, well, why don't we use French oak? French oak gives you different characteristics. Again, so it's more dense, so you don't lose as much of the kind of top notes, so it stays peppery. But with the bourbon, you kind of lose that fieriness of estery, or not ester, but more like acetaldehyde type flavors quickly in the maturation. So after a few years in bourbon, and if you were watching my words of wisdom, about 6, 8 years of age is about the optimum time to switch it into something else. But and I'm talking here about the likes of the Madeira, port, but sherry casks seem to work very well from the get-go because they've got a lot of more of those kind of ripe fruits, Christmas cake kind of flavors that you were getting in there.
What's your favorite kind of sherry now? No.
Yeah.
Oh, I would have to say that it comes down to the wood selection, and there are so many variables in that game that you just have to be very careful to know when you taste your cask, you buy the right cask. I have had some absolutely stunning Oloroso, but I've also had some excellent Pedro Jimenez. And on general, again, depending on how long you mature in those casks, you take a 14-year-old like this and put it in for a year, and you could have brilliant stuff. But I find with sherry tends to take about 2 years or more. The Madeira you talked about earlier, 3 months. I mean, you wouldn't believe the change that had happened in 3 months, and you just have to be careful because if you go over time, you lose the balance. So it's all about keeping an eye on your stock.
They're different size barrels, aren't they, Madeira and sherry?
Well, again, a lot of the Madeira casks are reconstituted American bourbon barrels into what they call barriques, which are around about 225 litre in capacity. Sherry casks tend to come from the European oak, or hogsheads as well can be made out of the bourbon barrels. So they're about 250 litres. So again, sometimes they can be made out of European oak as well. So you just have to be careful about where you're getting it, and they all give you a different character and flavor. Not to mention the fact that the malt that you use may or may not be a success. You just have to do those experiments and see where the sweet spots are and things like that. And this 14-year-old is also, it's bottled at 46%. So again, people would ask the question, why 46? And 46 is there because we don't chill filter it. So some of the experts like Mark there might say, well, you shouldn't chill filter any whiskey, but if you're bottling it below 46, it's just going to go cloudy. So you want to deliver a product that has appeals to people. If you look at a whiskey and it's cloudy, you say, "Oh God, what's wrong with it?" You know, it's the first reaction. So people that wouldn't be familiar with whiskey.
There's been a massive swing though in the wine world, like towards cloudy, unfiltered, natural wine, aged in concrete and quervies and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's coming from the natural beers as well. I mean, people our audiences now are much more educated. They want to know more. They want to know what's happening. They want to know why this, why that, and that kind of chill filtration. When people find out about chill filtration, well, they're mad to see, is there a difference between a chill filtered and an unchill filtered?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's your 14-year-old unchill filtered. Try it, and then you know, if we don't have a malt out there at the moment that is chill filtered, the 18-year-old we're going to taste next is at 43%, and it's filtered, yes, but not to the same extent as a full chill filtration, because once the water goes in there, some of those compounds that are in the spirit that have been extracted from the wood and in the original spirit precipitate out to give us a kind of cloudiness. And I've seen whiskey that hasn't been chill filtered, and you look at it and you find it's just like someone's had a little ball of cotton wool floating around in the whiskey, or it can be really cloudy, but eventually it'll crystallize and deposit on the bottom of the bottle.
Back in my Celtic whiskey shop days, we had a couple of different instances of severe flock haze in bottles, and we had a particular single cask. I think it was a red wine cask. It was done with Napo Castle, and we done it. I think it was a Mongar Burgundy barrel. But when they arrived into the shop, it literally, as you said there, it was like there was a cotton wool in the bottle. It was mad, and we were all worried at the time that we wouldn't be able to sell them, but we weren't going to send them back, and we just explained it to people and told people it was something that was a unique selling point, and I think we got rid of it. Geez, we must have sold the 200 bottles in a month or two, but it's funny to see, because I had never experienced it before, but it was in that particular batch, it was particularly bad, and you could see how it would turn people off, you know.
I know, but I mean, this is exactly the whole point. The more information that we can disseminate, the more informed our customers are, the more that they say, well, look, well, why does the whiskey taste like this? And there are reasons for everything in it. And I think whiskey as developing a kind of a following, not unlike the wine. And people find wines and beers. I mean, craft beer just taken off over the last.
I think it's like fandom culture in general has expanded because it's been democratized by the internet. Like there are Lord of the Rings fandoms, and there are there's millions of different, and it's all the same part of your brain that like seeks out connection due to this sort of mutual respect for a common experience. And whiskey is quite universal. It's steeped in history. You can't tell the history of Ireland without the history of whiskey being somewhat included. And I think that being able to reach each other in a quicker, more instant, and more even transparent way than we would even be when we're in person via the internet, because we can back check and we can communicate things and we can link to things without like screaming at each other when we're drunk over, now I'm right, you know. It has actually been very good for the formation and evolution of a community.
No, just in terms of a comment from Sergio here, he was just saying, I would imagine that the vast majority of, I just put on my glasses here, I would imagine that the vast majority, they could not differentiate between chill and chill filters. So some sort of a survey might be a good hook online that maybe one of us could initiate. And then Robert Johnson was saying that it was obviously mentioned earlier, but you're going with an age statement on the premium blend. But will we be lucky enough to see a single cask release soon? So I think we've already just done that recently, Noel. With
we had the 16-year-old.
I think the guys are actually looking for a cask strength. I think.
Oh, cask strength. Beg your pardon. Sorry.
Too,
yeah.
We did a cask strength there in Fox's recently, a 13-year-old grain, and I think if I'm not mistaken, there are very, very few bottles of that left. And coming up in the next wee while, we're going to be doing another a 18-year-old with you mentioned about how people have done different finishes and done some very, very well. In this instance, we've taken a slightly different twist on it, and we've put 3 or 4 finishes together to bring as much complexity and to the whiskey. So we've got. I initially thought I'd call them the 3 R's because it's rum, ruby port, and red wine, along with bourbon. So now it's called a burr of whiskies. So that's going to come out next probably hopefully before Christmas. But there's the 13-year-old that we mentioned a minute ago, and that is really another fine example of a single grain and really nice. And if you can get your hands on one of them, I'll sign it for you.
No, Noel Martin was just commenting there that the guaranteed money seems to be in the oak barrels. So why wouldn't we plant an oak forest here in Powerscourt for future generations?
You're not allowed to cut down oak trees in Ireland. They're protected. They have to be naturally felled, and naturally felling an oak tree takes hundreds of years.
Yeah, actually, Shameen, we had a couple of trees that fell with the recent storms. Even about 2 years ago, Noel, was it? There was 2
That's right.
trees on the driveway, and we looked into it.
Yeah, the issue, well, you know, it takes a minimum of 2 years to mature, to season oak before you even start getting into the idea of making a barrel out of it. And then where you're going to get a cooper nowadays to do them in this country, it's very, very hard to get someone that's going to take a tree and chop it down into staves after that, and then have it matured or air dried or whatever, or kiln dried. We just don't have that kind of kit around here anymore that I'm aware of. And then after that, develop it into a cask. So I'm sure some people have done it. We looked at the idea of making heads, which you could certainly do. In Cooley, we did that bog oak in the Connemara, and people might remember that. And that was an extremely successful product and had a nice story. Again, we could only make heads out of that because the bog oak is so dense, and you couldn't curve it into a barrel, but it worked very, very well. And look, I'm not saying we won't do it eventually. I'm sure some people have already looked at making in Irish casks from Irish oak. But yeah,
Glendalough did it actually. There were 3 trees for Glendalough that were naturally felled, and they did it with pot still whiskey, and they released it, and they're all numbered barrel by barrel.
Yeah, it'll happen.
But we won't rule it out, but we'll let nature take its course, Shameen. So they're very, we're all about sustainability here on Powerscourt Estate, and certainly I think every effort was made to ensure that, to future-proof the distillery, and it's definitely something that's first and foremost on the gardens and the estate.
And of course the oak that they do use.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say we're at 45 minutes now, so we might
better move on.
The 18-year-old, and I want to put a question to our wonderful panel we have here as well, while we're just getting ready for the 18 there. So obviously this is not in our trilogy pack, but we thought that we would treat our fantastic panelists here this evening to the 18-year-old. Most of you have already tasted it, but we thought it might be nice to kind of get your commentary on the nose and the taste and so on. It's definitely one that's been very popular since we launched it last November, and something that might be nice for someone to find in their Christmas stocking or on the mantelpiece on Christmas morning. So especially after the year we've had. So I'll hand over to Noel on that one, on the tasting.
Well, I mean, the 18-year-old probably is, of the range, would be one of my favorites. I mean, I love the grain. I love them all. They're all like my kids. But as I say, you can never go through a tasting without coming along and saying, oh, this hits all the spots for me. and I can sit down of an evening and just sip away at this for ages and ages and ages, and just keep coming back for more and more. It's just got such a fullness, ripeness, a moorishness, and I look it put me a name on this one again. I really enjoy this every night. So guys, I hope you enjoy it as much as I do.
I'll jump in there straight away. I think this again, good quality distillate, good quality casks. It's got that really kind of distinct apple and pears aromas that you generally get with these types of whiskies. Got a little bit of that kind of malt spice character. There's a lovely kind of ginger snap kind of thing going on in there, but it's also got this kind of underlying sweetness. I described it when I tasted it first as kind of like almost like a sweet cider. The apples really bursting through. But the palate, again, I think I don't think it's the ABV that makes it more refined, the fact that it's lower, but it's just got this kind of touch of delicacy, which the 14's more kind of robust, where this is just that little bit of refinement to it. There's loads of vanilla, lots of charred wood. It's got that kind of pencil shavings thing going on there, which you get from bourbon casks. But it's also got this like kind of cracked caramel, kind of almost kind of candied peel sort of thing going on. And the finish is really warm. It's almost like apple pie. But it's just, again, it takes you on a journey. When people ask me, how do I grade whiskies, or what am I looking for in a whiskey? I generally say what I'm looking for is a start, a middle, and an end. And if you get a start and a middle and a middle and an end and a middle end and a little bit more, then you're drinking something that's really, really good quality. But again, I think this is a really good example of good batch selection, good blending, bringing the best out in a single malt. It's a really, really nice whiskey. I don't think it's again it's got. I'd say I would probably prefer this again, maybe with a wine cask finish or something like that. But you can't take anything away from it, and that's just me personally. It's just another really good example of really good whiskey making.
I think what's great about it is that it under promises and over delivers. I think that's the key to real customer satisfaction, is that you don't promise more than you can deliver, but you do deliver more than you promise, because that's what keeps my customers, I think, coming back. If you send them off with something and you're like, look, it's a €40 whiskey, it's very standard, but there's something interesting about it that I enjoy, and they come back and they're like, oh, I really like that, what would you recommend for a level up? And you build your trust with your consumer. And I think this is a great one for someone who wants to spend a little bit more, maybe around Christmas or something, because it's not a casually consumed whiskey. It's at the €140 price point. People will be doing their research for a spend like this. And I think what's great with a customer is to be able to say, this is got the classic delivery of a single malt, so you know that you'll like it if you like other single malts. But like Mark said, it's like a good novel. It twists, it turns, it's got a character to it, and it's quite engaging. And I know none of these words really sound like whiskey words, but I think that when you're tasting it, you're like, oh, there's the orange peel, it's really interesting. Oh, there's a little clove that comes in there, the vanilla straight down the middle. You can, every time you go back to it, you can taste what you have tasted and continue to find something new that kind of builds in an arc. So I think it's a really good whiskey for that. I think the only problem that it suffers at the moment is that it's at a very competitive price point for a Christmas whiskey, with Teeling's 18-year-old and Renaissance coming in at the same price point, and their marketing budget being so high. And that would be the only thing that I'd say maybe hinders it in retail at my end anyway.
Interesting.
Shameen, the marketing budget is always going to up the ante on these things. And what about you, John?
Well, it's terrible. I'm going to rob a training analogy here, but tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. right? So again, you've got that strong lineage of the honey, vanilla, lots of beautiful malt following through from the 14-year-old and so on and so forth. Lots of nice fruit. On the taste, similarly again, you've got lovely malt, you've got the cinnamon, you've got caramel this time. There's a deeper body to this, which I think is fabulous actually. Adds a new dimension to it, and certainly contributes towards the finish. Finish again is lovely, lovely and long, and I have to say it's a little bit of spice on it, and just an incredibly enjoyable drink. I mean, it's I suppose currently, accepting the 16-year-old, which I have a very special place in my heart for that 16-year-old. I think it's really lovely. That the 18-year-old is the epitome of the range, and I think it's well worth going through them and seeing the various profiles develop. And yeah, it's really lovely.
Thanks very much.
It's a really good whiskey for working with food. It's got the textures that you want and the body that you want when you're trying to pair. Works really well with oysters, but also an easy one for anybody to do at home. Get your soda bread, nice bit of real butter, and a nice slice of goat's cheese on it. Really, really good with this whiskey. All those textures, the textures of the cheese, the butter, the bread, it cuts through it nicely because it has this kind of lovely, warming kind of cinnamon spice and almost walnutty thing going on, which really, really balances really well with those kind of bigger flavors. It's just a great whiskey. When you're making whiskey in Powerscourt, Noel, is this a style that you would see your single malt being in 18 years time, or is it what's your distillate going to be like? Is it a little bit different or a little bit more soft, or is it going to be big and robust? Or
well, I mean, we're going to have a range of different distillates, and we do both pot still and malt. We've done a little bit of double distilled malt. A lot of what we've done currently is triple distilled, and what I'm trying to level out, I guess, is eventually what is going to be the final style. We will have spirit matured this time next year. It will be whiskey, and I think that I've got a great team of guys working for me in the distillery. I mean, literally they are the guys coming on into the next generation, and it's great to give them the knowledge that I have learned over the many years that I've spent in the industry, and the likes of Dara, Nick, Johnny, and the rest of the lads, Shane and Mikey. These are the people that are going to bring out these whiskies in the future. And in the next 20 years, I won't be here.
Yeah,
we don't know. Certainly, I mean, this is going to be their game, and hopefully, whatever I've shown them will reap benefits. And I'm sure they will. The whiskey that I've seen coming along so far is really, really good, and it's a credit to them and a credit to the way that the distillery we've built in Powerscourt is as a new modern plant, purposely built. I mean, when we were in Cooley, we had columns that were used to make neutral spirit to make our grain, and they were great, really were. But we had to retrofit the distillery with malt equipment, and when you do that kind of things, there are all kinds of compromises. And yet we produced great spirit, but we got great advice. I mean, and that's what makes this whole industry an interesting place to be, because you could build another Powerscourt distillery in the field next door and produce different whiskey. There's so many things that influence what ends up in your glass. It's just incredible, and that's the beauty of the industry as well. So I look forward to bringing out more expressions of this old whiskies, but also we will marry some of the older whiskey with possibly some of the new whiskey, just to see how that works. And there are definitely interesting times ahead. It's great to see some of the newer distilleries bringing out their new make now. I mean, we have about a handful of 3-year-old and 4-year-old whiskies. I think I was in Great Northern yesterday, and they're at 4 or 5 years of age already, and supplying a lot of good whiskey all over the world now. So
I've been lucky enough to meet the distillation team and the wider team in general in Perscourt, and it's fabulous, the energy. There is a tremendous energy there, and great resources. The setting is just, I mean, it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful.
Yep.
So I think it's
inspiring.
I mean, sorry?
It's inspiring, the setting.
Yes, well, yeah. I mean, it really is. But I mean, the energy and like I said, the resources, it's fantastic. And I think that the place is just really, really full of promise. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of there over the next few years.
Well, just even on that note, John, and thank you so much for your contributions this evening in the tasting. It's been fantastic. But I think it would be remiss of us not to put a question, seeing as we have a front of house retail industry expert in Shameen and Mark. You have first-hand knowledge of the bar and trade and whiskey industry, and John, as a frontline consumer, I'd love to get just, to finish up perhaps your perspective on, it has been a difficult time for everybody, and some distilleries have reopened since June, the beginning of July, since we've been allowed to, and others haven't, and they've focused on their production and so on. Obviously retail is challenging, and the bars, well, we won't say anything till they open in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully, but challenging all around for everybody. So I suppose it'd be lovely to just get your perspectives. I might start with yourself, Shameen, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I think as retail, we have didn't stop. So part of us were a little bit jealous of everyone who got this time off to better themselves or refocus themselves. But also, we know that's not actually how it worked. So but I think what's trying about retail at the moment is crisis management of customers. People are tetchy, people are coming from very different places. There are people who think all of these measures are over exaggerated and don't quite respect them or you. And then there are people who want to stay as far away from you as possible, but still need help. So that's been a challenge just for like your on the floor staff. But the best way to manage it really is to get together on Friday, have a glass of wine and give out about what we call fustomers, which are fussy customers. And then just let it go, I coined that term, you can't have it. But also been a massive shift from in-person retail to website and deliveries, which presents its own challenges. Now, we were quite lucky in Mitchell & Son to have the infrastructure in place to scale it up, because we had already worked at numbers like this at Christmas time, but we hadn't worked with numbers like that consistently. So it was very tiring for a lot of us, and you had to be constantly evaluating things, and your ordering shifted, and my average spend per bottle for wine went from €55 a bottle to I think it was $18.50 per bottle. But the average amount of bottles per person went from 3 to 12, so there was a shift. Your average spend in whiskey went from about 85 to 55 to 60. And that was like a lot of more people maybe getting 35, 40 euro whiskey, and they'd get like 4 of them instead of the one, redbreast. So like it was getting used to the new trends, adapting to them constantly, and being able to adapt your ordering to that and not to last year, which was a massive shift for us, because usually you'd run your sales reports for the previous year, estimate them, work out your trends, your new releases, that kind of thing.
And do you see, Shameen, then, another trend emerging then on the run of Christmas now, or do you see it kind of remaining the same and being a bit more price conscious?
I think it's going to remain the same for individuals. We do a lot of corporate gifts, and it's looking like instead of Christmas parties, maybe the people trying to keep their staff sane and happy will maybe spend a little bit more on their gifts to their consumers. We've had what we call multi-drop deliveries. So I had like 70 deliveries for one company this week. I had 120 for another company this week. I had 56 for a wedding this week. So that's all just in one week. and they're all
Yeah.
like Dublin, Meath, Kildare based. So
Right.
when you go national with it, it's just
Yeah.
different. But the pricing of it is different because you've got to pay for delivery, packaging, insurance, because the theft rate of alcohol is much higher. Like it just
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So lots of different things to take into account there. And yourself, Mark, or what have you kind of observed, I suppose, having first-hand experience on the trade bar side of things?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult time for everyone in terms of the bar trade. Obviously, we got hopefully some good news this weekend that the whole industry should be able to open on the 21st of this month. I was a casualty of the industry. Unfortunately, I lost my job due to COVID in the bar industry, and there's many more like me. Thankfully, a lot of people are retaining their jobs, and it's good and it's moving forward. But it's definitely a time where I think bars need to think about reinventing themselves. They need to think about the pluses and the positives of doing social distancing, of having their tables booked, of doing only table service, of they're increasing their customer interaction, and their opportunity to sell is increasing tenfold. So they need to start thinking less about throwing out pints and more about what they're actually serving to their customers. Which I think will lead to the Irish pub industry getting even better. We're already the best pubs in the world, but it's very much about getting that little bit better. I think from a whiskey industry perspective, everybody seems to be. I've been lucky to pick up a lot of work doing little odd jobs for different distilleries and different companies, and even the Irish Whiskey Association, a few others, and Powerscourt as well. I've been working with Caroline, which is great. But people are using this time to really, especially the younger brands, are using this time to really get into the nitty gritty of what they want to do in 2021, how they're going to position themselves, maybe repositioning themselves in terms of their on-trade focus. So, coming up with new ideas. A lot of the bigger companies are starting to spend a lot of money on digital. So doing a lot of kind of social media campaigns, doing a lot of video content, things like that, which is really good and positive for the industry. And it's also, obviously it was good for some distilleries to pick up some business in terms of making hand sanitizer and stuff like that, which was a bit of cash flow in the door, which was good, and that's good for the industry. But I also think it's a time where the whole consumer industry in the world has kind of been shaken, and for whiskey distilleries now, they realize that they really need to hone in, focus, make really, really good products, get their brand identity correct, and tell a really true story to their consumer. And I think that's something that Powerscourt's doing very well, and getting involved with the ins and outs of their products and pushing it forward. And then with the distillery, like I've been lucky enough to spend some time with Dara down in the distillery, going through production tenfold and seeing the variation of what's going on, the experimentation, the really leaning heavily on Noel's expertise and creating really good whiskey. So I think not just the whiskey industry was always planning 20, 30 and 40 years ahead, but I think the bar industry, retail industry, hospitality and tourism as a whole really now need to start thinking 20 years ahead as well, and think that things like this whole COVID thing can happen, and we need to be better prepared for it. So it's great to see a lot of local places are doing quite well, because Irish people are now staycationing in Ireland, but we need to keep that up. But just before we log off.
Yeah, they're really supporting the local industries and so on.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for that, Mark. Appreciate your perspective on it. And absolutely, we're all very much looking forward to all of the pubs being open, and getting some sort of normality back there again. And I suppose, John, for consumers in general, it has been a little bit of a bonanza online. There's been just so much activity across the board, from distilleries and cocktail classes. And I know, of course, you were very much involved with the Irish Whiskey Society, and you've had lots of tastings as well. So what's your kind of take on it from a consumer perspective?
Well, we've had two very unique perspectives, and very insightful. Thanks to Shamim and to Mark. I mean, it's very insightful in terms of the impacts from the customer perspective. I just get to enjoy it, right? And also keep a very close eye on what I think I should be putting aside and for future years perhaps, and so on. But I suppose from the commercial and from the investment perspectives even, and certainly from the societal perspectives, it's really, really heartening to see the agility within the Irish whiskey industry in terms of being able to adopt very, very quickly, and let's be honest, almost under duress, the multitude of electronic platforms that have come available, be it Zoom or be it Skype or Hangout or goodness knows what, and adopt to those and to develop tasting events and interactions for customers to keep the momentum going. It's great because there was a real risk of a vacuum, and that vacuum has really been averted. I think that the industry has shown a tremendous resilience, and certainly there's been, it's boded some terrible economic times for bars and so on, and behind bars are people, right, and jobs and livelihoods and so on, and that's no small thing. It's been really, really difficult for people. I think there's a very real public health concern. I think whatever we can do, and certainly the CSR aspect from the industry, in terms of the production, like Mark mentioned there, the production of the hand sanitizers, etc. That was done. That was invaluable to the country, absolutely invaluable. And people stepped up where they were able to step up, wherever possible, and they did it. And I think it's been tremendous. I see only good things. We come through something like this, there's only an upside moving in through Christmas, moving through 2021. There's only an upside. We will come out of this stronger. And the lineup we have this evening is in essence almost testament to that, and it's really heartening. And I wish everybody well, and we will come through this stronger. We really will.
But I think you've got a nutshell there, John. The Irish whiskey industry has shown its resilience in spades over the last centuries. So we will persevere.
We will.
Do this better than ever before. So look, it remains just to really thank you all so much for your contributions this evening. It's been fantastic to get your insights, and Noel, goes without saying, I'm sure you've enjoyed the company, the educated company on the whiskey, and thank you again to yourself, Noel, and we look forward to hosting a number of webinars, probably every 3 or 4 weeks, but we will be punctuating that with some podcasts, and we have a new lady to bring to your screen, to your podcasts, in the form of Santina, so she will be bringing a unique perspective to that, which we all look forward to. And I just want to thank everybody again. We are running a promotion at the moment throughout September with every bottle of 700ml, you're getting your 50ml there of the grain, which we were all so enthusiastically celebrating earlier on in the tasting. So that's available on our website and through our trade partners. So please do avail, and we are open here in Parts, even though it's reduced days, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, but please do look us up online and book in, and we'd love to welcome you all down for a tasting here at the distillery. In the meantime, this YouTube episode, or this webinar, will be available on YouTube in the coming days, and we hope you'll be able to tune in and digest it a little bit more then. So thank you again to everybody. Sláinte. Stay well. Take care.
Sláinte.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Robin, if you could give us a wee bit of info why you came into the CAST programme. I know yourself and Breed decided to go ahead and become CAST members. Why did you come to that decision?
Yeah, Breed and myself, we have been looking around. We're at a stage in our life there that we were looking for some investments. I personally have a fond interest in whiskey, The Paris Court brand is probably what drew us here. You know, I've been visiting Paris Court since I was a child, you know, be it the waterfall or even the golf course in later years. And Noel Sweeney's relationship with this project was of big interest to me as well. Being a local, everything just ties in together there. It's the hotel, it's the house, it's the gardens, the waterfall, and now the whiskey, and I think it just brings a fantastic story together.
And are you a big whiskey fan, or is it something you appreciate and enjoy?
I certainly enjoy whiskey, but I'm learning all the time. I think it's quite a complex process. It's a complex drink. It offers quite an exciting learning curve there for everybody, and it seems it's very much a social drink now as well. You know, you see younger people drinking it now. It's got its place now in that environment, and I think it's fantastic. It's a great story behind it.
Is the social side, is that something which drew you to the CAST programme?
What you've delivered here with the tasting rooms and the environment that you've built here in that beautiful building, I think that lends itself as well to engaging more in investment, not just sort of sitting back and waiting for your 3 years, to be actually engaged in the process to some degree, and then to share it with friends and family. I think it's a great opportunity, yeah.
And you're saying you're interested in learning more about whiskey, the possibility of finishing
That really excites us, to try and possibly get something there that's a little unique to somebody else's. And I think there could be great fun there around different barrels and working with Noel as well and taking his advice. Yeah, I think that's going to be really good. Yeah.
Well, we're absolutely delighted to have both you and Reid as members.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's been fantastic so far.
Many events and a wee whiskey along the way over the next time.
I'm looking forward to it.
We're here in the Paris Court Distillery Maturation Warehouse with Noel Sweeney. Noel, delighted to have you here to have a chat with you. We're talking about our CAST programme. Can you tell me just what is the Paris Court Distillery CAST programme?
I think the CAST programme is a unique opportunity for people to get involved in the distillery and in the whisky that we produce. There are only 397 casks, and as such that gives quite a limited number of people the opportunity to get involved. And the whisky will be in our cask for up to 10 years. It'll be 200 litres of new make spirit, and it's a kind of an exclusive club for members to be in, and they will have certain privileges, and they'll have access to events that will be happening here and to special releases of whiskies that we will release over the next 10 years. So members will have a lot of other benefits as well around the estate in the future also.
And the Irish whisky industry is booming, it's buoyant at the moment, both in Ireland and globally. There's a lot of new distilleries opened up and some CAST programs as well. Can you tell us what's different, what's special about Paris Court Distillery?
Well, Paris Court Distillery is located in a beautiful part of Ireland, in one of the most nicest valleys, as I said, the Garden of Ireland. But apart from that, you have the spirit that we're going to be producing here. I think that the most important things, you can distill it down to three things. The people, the plant and equipment that we use, and the produce or the ingredients. We start with the ingredients. The water, for example, has to be of a very good quality. And in Paris Court, we're very fortunate to have an aquifer underneath the estate, and the water is coming from that, and it will be of a mineral water, and it's already drinking water quality. After that, you're talking about the plant and equipment. So we had our distillery built by Forsyths, who would be renowned worldwide for pot still production and the installation of equipment. And so they did all of the engineering. So all of these things influence the spirit. And of course, the stills. I've been lucky to be able to have my input on the still and the shape of the still, so that we get the correct distillation, and then also the different cuts that you can make through the distillation influences the final spirit that we make. Finally, the people. I myself have been in the distilling business for over 40 years. 30 years of that has been in whisky, and I'm the only working Irish distiller that's in the Whisky Hall of Fame, and it's been a privilege to be part of a tradition that has gone on for centuries in this country, and the team that I have built around me are learning those traditions in milling, fermentation, distilling and maturation. And it's a great honour to be able to pass that tradition on to the new generation.
Robin, if you could give us a wee bit of info why you came into the CAST programme. I know yourself and Breed decided to go ahead and become CAST members. Why did you come to that decision?
Yeah, Breed and myself, we have been looking around. We're at a stage in our life there that we were looking for some investments. I personally have a fond interest in whisky. The Powerscourt brand is probably what drew us here. You know, I've been visiting Powerscourt since I was a child, you know, be it the waterfall or even the golf course in later years. And Noel Sweeney's relationship with this project was of big interest to me as well. Being a local, everything just ties in together there. It's the hotel, it's the house, it's the gardens, the waterfall, and now the whisky, and I think it just brings a fantastic story together.
And are you a big whisky fan, or is it something you appreciate and enjoy?
I certainly enjoy whisky, but I'm learning all the time. I think it's quite a complex process. It's a complex drink. It offers quite an exciting learning curve there for everybody, and it seems it's very much a social drink now as well. You know, you see younger people drinking it now. It's got its place now in that environment, and I think it's fantastic. It's a great story behind it.
Is the social side, is that something which drew you to the CAST programme?
What you've delivered here with the tasting rooms and the environment that you've built here in that beautiful building, I think that lends itself as well to engaging more in investment, not just sort of sitting back and waiting for your 3 years, to be actually engaged in the process to some degree, and then to share it with friends and family. I think it's a great opportunity, yeah.
And you're saying you're interested in learning more about whisky, the possibility of finishing it in different cask finishes, whether it's Amarone or sherry or rum. Is that something which you...
That really excites us, to try and possibly get something there that's a little unique to somebody else's. And I think there could be great fun there around different barrels and working with Noel as well and taking his advice. Yeah, I think that's going to be really good. Yeah.
Well, we're absolutely delighted to have both you and Breed as members.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it's been fantastic so far.
Many events and a wee whisky along the way over the next 10
I'm looking forward to it.
We're here in the Powerscourt Distillery Maturation Warehouse with Noel Sweeney. Noel, delighted to be here to have a chat with you. We're talking about our CAST programme. Can you tell me just what is the Powerscourt Distillery CAST programme?
I think the CAST programme is a unique opportunity for people to get involved in the distillery and in the whisky that we produce. There are only 397 casks, and as such that gives quite a limited number of people the opportunity to get involved. And the whisky will be in our cask for up to 10 years. It'll be 200 litres of new make spirit, and it's a kind of an exclusive club for members to be in, and they will have certain privileges, and they'll have access to events that will be happening here and to special releases of whiskies that we will release over the next 10 years. So members will have a lot of other benefits as well around the estate in the future also.
And the Irish whiskey industry is booming and it's buoyant at the moment, both in Ireland and globally. There's a lot of new distilleries opened up and some cask programs as well. Can you tell us what's different, what's special about Powerscourt Distillery?
Well, Powerscourt Distillery is located in a beautiful part of Ireland, in one of the most nicest valleys, as I said, the Garden of Ireland. But apart from that, you have the spirit that we're going to be producing here. I think that the most important things, you can distill it down to three things. The people, the plant and equipment that we use, and the produce or the ingredients. We start with the ingredients. The water, for example, has to be of a very good quality. And in Powerscourt, we're very fortunate to have an aquifer underneath the estate, and the water is coming from that, and it would be of a mineral water, and it's already drinking water quality. After that, you're talking about the plant and equipment. So we had our distillery built by Forsyths, who would be renowned worldwide for pot still production and the installation of equipment. And so they did all of the engineering. So all of these things influence the spirit. And of course the stills. I've been lucky to be able to have my input on the still and the shape of the still so that we get the correct distillation, and then also the different cuts that you can make through the distillation influences the final spirit that we make. Finally, the people. I myself have been in the distilling business for over 40 years. 30 years of that has been in whiskey, and I'm the only working Irish distiller that's in the Whiskey Hall of Fame, and it's been a privilege to be part of a tradition that has gone on for centuries in this country. And the team that I have built around me are learning those traditions in milling, fermentation, distilling and maturation. And it's a great honour to be able to pass that tradition on to the new generation.